I was told the graduation dinner was canceled, that there were too many people, not enough space, and that we would celebrate another time. But something did not sit right with me, so I drove there anyway. I sat across the street, watching through the window as my own family laughed, toasted, and celebrated without me. In that moment, I realized it was not just a dinner I had been excluded from. It was something much deeper. And that was the night everything I believed about love, trust, and family began to change. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 71 years old, and I have lived in the same house on Magnolia Street in Savannah, Georgia, for more than 4 decades. It is a wide, aging southern home with pale blue shutters and a front porch that wraps around like an embrace. My husband and I built this house together when we were still young enough to believe time would stretch endlessly ahead of us. Now, it feels like time has folded in on itself, leaving me here alone with the echoes of a life we once shared. Every morning, I wake before the sun fully rises. I make my coffee the same way I have for years, strong and dark, and I carry it out to the porch. The air in Savannah is thick even in the early hours, carrying the scent of magnolia and damp earth. I sit in the same chair my husband used to favor, and for a few quiet minutes, I let myself pretend that nothing has changed. But things have changed. They changed the day my husband died. It was his heart, sudden and merciless. After 40 years together, I found myself learning how to exist without the one person who had always understood me without explanation. Grief does not leave all at once. It settles into the corners of your life and stays there, quiet but constant. Before I retired, I worked as a head nurse at the regional hospital. It was a demanding job, one that required steady hands and a calm mind, even in the middle of chaos. I spent decades taking care of strangers, making decisions that mattered, and putting other people's needs ahead of my own. That kind of work shapes you. It teaches you patience and resilience and a certain willingness to carry burdens without complaint. Financially, I am comfortable, not wealthy, but careful. My husband and I planned for the future, and I have always been disciplined with money. I pay my bills on time, I keep records of everything, and I have never needed to rely on anyone else to take care of me. That independence has always been a quiet source of pride. My son, Daniel, is the center of what remains of my immediate family. He is 42 now, successful by most standards, working in finance for a company based in Atlanta. He speaks confidently about investments and opportunities, about markets and strategies that I only partially understand. I have always been proud of him. I still am. He married a woman named Vanessa 6 years ago. Vanessa comes from a world very different from mine. Her family is wealthy, polished, and deeply concerned with appearances. She is not openly cruel, but there is a distance in the way she carries herself, as though she is always measuring the room and deciding where everyone belongs. I have never quite known where I fit in her world. Their daughter, Lily, is 21, and she is the one who still bridges that distance for me. From the time she was small, she would sit at my kitchen table doing homework while I cooked dinner. She has her grandfather's quiet nature and his steady kindness. Loving her has always felt easy, natural, unquestioned. For a long time, I believed that love alone was enough to hold a family together. I believed that if you showed up, if you gave what you could, if you stayed patient and understanding, everything would find its balance. Lately, though, there has been a feeling I cannot quite name, like a shift in the air before a storm. Nothing obvious, nothing I can point to directly, but something that makes the house feel just a little less steady than it used to. If you're still watching and starting to sense that something feels just a little off beneath the surface, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to what changed everything. The first time Daniel asked me for money, it did not feel like anything worth remembering. It was a simple phone call on a Tuesday evening, his voice calm and casual, the way it always had been when he was trying not to make something sound serious. He told me there was a short-term investment opportunity, something that needed to move quickly, and he just needed a little flexibility until things settled. The amount was $2,500. I did not hesitate. I told him I could transfer it the next morning. That was what mothers did, I thought. We filled in the gaps when our children needed us. I did not ask questions about returns or timelines. I trusted him. The second time came a few weeks later. This time it was a little more, and the explanation was different. Something about unexpected expenses, about things not lining up the way he had planned. I remember pausing for a moment before agreeing, just long enough to notice the hesitation in myself, and then I pushed it aside. I told myself that life was unpredictable, even for people who seemed to have everything under control. After that, the calls began to come more regularly. Not constantly, but often enough that I started to recognize the pattern. Each time there was a reason that made sense on the surface, a repair that could not wait, a financial gap that needed to be bridged, an opportunity that would pass if he did not act quickly. The amounts varied. Some were small enough to feel insignificant. Others were large enough that I would sit for a moment after the call ended, staring at my phone, feeling something I could not quite name. Still, I said yes. Every time, I said yes. What I did not say, what I did not even fully admit to myself, was that something about it felt off. Not wrong in a way I could point to directly, but not entirely right either. It was in the way the conversations ended quickly, before I could ask too much. It was in the way repayment was always mentioned, but never followed through. Months passed, then more months. The money did not come back. At first, I did not keep track. I did not want to. It felt transactional, and I did not want my relationship with my son to become something that could be measured in numbers. But I have always been a person who notices patterns. Years in a hospital teach you that small details matter, that what you ignore today can become something serious tomorrow. So I began to write things down. Just a small notebook at first. Dates, amounts, the reasons he gave. Nothing elaborate, nothing I intended to confront him with. It was simply a way to keep things clear in my own mind. Over time, that notebook became something else. It became a record I returned to more often than I wanted to admit. I would sit at my kitchen table in the morning, coffee cooling beside me, flipping through the pages, tracing the numbers with my finger as if they might change if I looked at them long enough. One morning, I decided to add everything together. I took out a pen and a piece of paper and wrote each number down in a single column. I checked it twice, then a third time. When I reached the total, I stopped. $31,000. I sat there for a long time without moving. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. That number was not just a number. It was time. It was plans I had quietly set aside. It was things I had chosen not to do without fully acknowledging why. I thought about the washing machine that had been making noise for months, about the trip I had postponed, about the small ways I had adjusted my life without calling attention to it. And then, for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Why would a man who said he was doing well need this much help? I did not have an answer, not one I was ready to accept. So I closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and told myself what I had been telling myself all along. There was probably a reasonable explanation. If you're still watching, and those numbers are starting to raise questions in your mind, comment number 2 below to let me know you're paying attention. Now, let's see where those questions begin to lead. I had been thinking about Lily's graduation long before anyone mentioned dates or tickets. It was one of those milestones that settles quietly into your heart years in advance, growing in meaning as time passes. I remembered her as a little girl, sitting at my kitchen table, her feet not quite touching the floor, asking me to help her with spelling words. I remembered the care packages I mailed during her first year away at college, each one packed with more love than she probably realized. Watching her reach this moment felt, in some quiet way, like watching a promise being fulfilled. So when spring arrived and the date drew closer, I found myself preparing in small, thoughtful ways. I picked out a dress that felt appropriate for the occasion, something simple but dignified. I chose a gift for her as well, taking my time to find something that carried meaning rather than just value. I imagined the ceremony clearly, the rows of chairs, the sound of names being called, the brief but powerful moment when Lily would walk across the stage. I imagined myself there, sitting among the crowd, knowing I had been part of the journey that brought her to that point. Daniel called me one evening about 3 weeks before the graduation. His tone was light, almost rehearsed in its calmness, and I sensed immediately that the call carried more weight than he wanted to show. He explained that the ceremony would be large, that seating was limited, and that each graduate had only a certain number of tickets available. He said Lily had already distributed them, and between himself, Vanessa, and Vanessa's parents, who were planning to attend, there were no tickets left. He said it quickly, as if efficiency might make the message easier to accept. I remember holding the phone in my hand and looking out the window as he spoke. The words made sense in a practical way. Large ceremonies often had restrictions. Families had to make choices. It was not unreasonable. That is what I told myself in the moment. I told him I understood. The words came out easily, almost automatically, the way they had so many times before. I did not want to make things difficult. I did not want to place him in a position where he felt he had to choose. Still, something inside me shifted. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a small crack forming in glass. I felt it more than I understood it, a subtle awareness that I had been placed just outside the circle of something that mattered. Daniel continued, offering what he clearly believed was a solution. He said they would plan a special dinner afterward, just family, something more intimate where we could celebrate Lily together. He emphasized that it would be more meaningful that way, less rushed, more personal. I held on to that idea. I let it settle in my mind as something to look forward to, something that would balance the disappointment I did not fully allow myself to feel. I began to shift my attention toward that dinner, imagining the table, the conversation, the moment I would give Lily her gift and tell her how proud I was. In the days that followed, I focused on that future moment. Whenever the thought of the ceremony surfaced, I gently redirected myself. There was no use dwelling on something I could not change. And yet, the feeling remained. A faint, persistent sense that something about the situation was not entirely right. I did not question Daniel. I did not ask Lily directly. I did what I had always done. I trusted. I adjusted. I made room for explanations that allowed everything to remain intact. By the time the week of the graduation arrived, I had convinced myself that everything was as it should be, that I was still part of the family, that nothing important had truly been taken from me. But somewhere beneath those thoughts, just out of reach, the crack remained. If you're still watching, and that missing invitation didn't sit right with you either, comment number 3 below to let me know you're feeling it too. Now let's see what happens when things start to fall apart. After I hung up the phone with Daniel about the graduation, I held on to the idea of that dinner the way a person holds on to something fragile and necessary. It became, in my mind, the real moment that mattered. Not the crowded ceremony, not the stage or the applause, but a quiet table where I could sit across from Lily, look her in the eye, and tell her how proud I was. In the days that followed, I found myself preparing in small, deliberate ways. I thought about what I might wear, something that felt warm but appropriate, something that reflected the importance of the occasion without calling attention to itself. I placed Lily's gift on my dining room table, still wrapped carefully, the paper smooth and untouched. Sometimes I would pause beside it, resting my hand lightly on top, as if that simple gesture could carry forward all the words I intended to say. The dinner became more than just a plan. It became reassurance, proof that I still belonged, that I had not been pushed to the edges of my own family. 2 days before we were supposed to meet, Daniel called again. I knew the moment I heard his voice that something had shifted. There was a certain carefulness in the way he spoke, a slight pause between sentences, as though he were choosing each word before letting it out. He told me that something had come up. Vanessa's family had changed their plans. There was another gathering, something that had already been arranged, and it would be better to reschedule our dinner for the following weekend. He said it quickly, almost gently, as if softness might make the message easier to accept. I listened without interrupting. I could feel the familiar instinct rising in me, the part of me that smoothed things over, that made space for inconvenience, that adjusted without asking for anything in return. I told him it was fine. I told him we could do it another time. When the call ended, the house felt unusually still, not quiet in the comforting way I was used to, but still in a way that made every small movement feel deliberate. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, my hand resting on the counter, trying to understand what exactly I was feeling. It was not just disappointment. It was something sharper, something that lingered. This was the second time plans had changed in a way that left me out. The second time something important had shifted just enough to place me on the outside looking in. That evening, I sat in my living room with my phone in my hand, scrolling absent-mindedly, not looking for anything in particular. I rarely spent much time on social media, but sometimes I liked to see glimpses of Lily's life, small moments she chose to share. That was when I saw it. Vanessa had posted a short video. It showed a long table set with plates and glasses, decorations arranged carefully, soft lighting casting everything in a warm glow. There were flowers, neatly folded napkins, and the unmistakable sense of preparation for something significant. Across the screen, a caption read, "Family Celebration." I watched it once, then again. There was no mention of me, no indication that I was expected to be there, no suggestion that this was anything other than a complete gathering, already decided and already full. Something inside me settled in a way that felt both heavy and clear. This was not an oversight. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a decision. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, replaying the past months in my mind, the calls, the money, the explanations that always made sense until they did not, the way plans shifted just enough to leave me behind. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that I had been choosing not to see what was already there. I did not call Daniel back. I did not send a message. I did not confront anyone. Instead, I made a quiet decision. I needed to see the truth for myself. If you're still watching and you can feel the truth getting closer to the surface, comment number 4 below to let me know you're ready for what's coming next. Now let's uncover what couldn't stay hidden. That night, I did not take long to get ready. There was no careful choosing of clothes, no second guessing. I put on a light sweater, picked up my keys, and stepped out of the house with a quiet sense of purpose I had not felt in a long time. The air was warm, the kind of southern evening that carried a stillness beneath it, as if the world itself was waiting. I did not tell anyone where I was going. The drive to Daniel's house took a little over 20 minutes. I had made it many times before, usually with something in the passenger seat, a dish, a gift, something to contribute. This time, the seat beside me was empty. The road felt longer than it should have, each streetlight passing in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I tried, more than once, to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there was a reasonable explanation waiting for me, that perhaps I had misunderstood what I saw online, that perhaps the dinner truly had been postponed. But underneath those thoughts, something steadier held its ground. When I turned onto Daniel Street, I slowed the car without meaning to. There were cars lined along the curb and filling the driveway, more than I had expected. I recognized Daniel's sedan immediately, parked in its usual place. Vanessa's vehicle sat beside it. A larger car I had seen before, one that belonged to her parents, was parked just behind them. The house was lit from the inside, every window glowing. I pulled over across the street and turned off the engine. For a moment, I simply sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the quiet hum of the night around me. Then I looked up. Through the front window, I could see movement. People shifting, passing by, gathering in small clusters. The soft flicker of light reflected off glass and polished surfaces. There was no doubt about it. Something was happening inside that house. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes adjusting, focusing. And then I saw Lily. She stood near the center of the room, her face lit in a way I had seen before, bright, open, full of something that looked like joy. Someone handed her a plate, and a moment later, I saw the outline of a cake, candles already blown out, laughter still lingering in the air even from a distance. People raised their glasses. Someone reached out to hug her. It was unmistakable. This was a celebration, not just any gathering, but the very one I had been told was no longer happening. I did not feel a sudden rush of anger. There was no sharp, explosive reaction. Instead, it was as if something inside me gave way quietly, like a door that had been held shut for too long finally opening. I sat there and watched for a few more moments, long enough to be certain, long enough to understand fully what I was seeing. No one looked toward the street. No one stepped outside to check for me. There was no space being held, no chair left open, no sign that I had ever been part of the plan. I was not late. I was not forgotten. I had simply not been included. I took a slow breath, then another. My hands were steady, which surprised me. For a brief moment, I considered getting out of the car, walking across the street, knocking on the door. I imagined what that would look like, the sudden silence, the explanations that would follow, the discomfort that would fill the room. But just as quickly, I let that thought go. I did not need to step inside to understand what had already been made clear. Instead, I reached into my purse and took out my phone. My attorney's number was still saved from a conversation we had months ago, one I had not fully been ready to act on at the time. I was ready now. When she answered, I spoke calmly. I told her I wanted to move forward, that I wanted everything documented, formal, and clear. As I ended the call, I looked once more at the lit window across the street. Then I started the car and drove away. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, just as I always had, but something about the quiet felt different. It was no longer the kind of stillness that asked me to reflect or to remember. It was clearer than that, steadier, like the air after a storm has passed and everything has settled into place. I made my coffee and carried it out to the porch, but I did not linger the way I usually did. My thoughts were already moving, organizing themselves, returning to everything that had led me to the night before. The phone calls, the money, the explanations that had once sounded reasonable and now felt carefully constructed. The image of that lit window across the street remained fixed in my mind, not as a source of pain, but as confirmation. For the first time, I was not trying to explain it away. I went back inside and opened the drawer where I kept my notebook. It was a simple thing, worn at the edges from being handled more often than I had intended. I placed it on the kitchen table and sat down, flipping through the pages slowly. Each entry was there in my own handwriting. Dates, amounts, reasons that had seemed urgent at the time. Now they read differently. I turned on my laptop and opened my bank statements, cross-checking each transfer, making sure everything matched. The process required focus, and I welcomed that. It gave my thoughts structure, something to hold on to that was not emotional or uncertain. When my attorney called later that morning, her voice was steady and professional. She asked me to walk her through the details, to confirm the timeline, to explain the context of each transaction. I answered carefully, without rushing, making sure that what I said reflected what had actually happened, not what I had once hoped was true. She told me that, based on what I had provided, there was a clear pattern. These were not gifts given freely without expectation. They had been presented as temporary support, with the understanding that they would be repaid. That distinction mattered. There was a legal basis to move forward. I listened, absorbing each word. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that this was the point where things would change in a way that could not be undone. Taking this step meant redefining my relationship with my son, moving it out of the space where everything was assumed and unspoken into something formal and undeniable. And yet, I did not feel hesitation. I felt clarity. We discussed the next steps: a formal letter, a complete record of the total amount, a request for a structured repayment plan within a defined period of time. It would be direct, but not hostile, firm, but not cruel. When she asked if I was ready to proceed, I looked down at the notebook in front of me, at the numbers that represented more than just money. They represented trust, given and taken for granted. Yes, I said. After the call ended, I sat for a moment longer, my hand resting on the table. I understood what this meant. I understood that Daniel might be angry, that he might feel betrayed in a way he would not immediately recognize as his own doing. But for the first time, I was not shaping my actions around how he might react. I was shaping them around what was right. When I signed the authorization later that afternoon, the motion felt simple, almost ordinary. A pen moving across paper, a name written in familiar handwriting, and yet it marked something significant. I was no longer the person who would quietly adjust and absorb. I had drawn a line. If you're still watching and you felt the moment everything finally shifts, comment number 6 below to let me know you're still here. Now let's move on to Chapter 7, where the truth starts speaking back. The letter was sent on a Monday morning. After that, there was nothing to do but wait. I moved through the day as I normally would, watering the plants, folding laundry, straightening things that did not need to be straightened. But beneath those small routines, there was a quiet tension that did not ease. It felt like the pause before something inevitable, the kind of silence that holds its breath. I knew Daniel would call. It was not a question of if, but when. It happened sooner than I expected. My phone rang less than an hour after the delivery was confirmed. His name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I simply looked at it. Then I answered. He did not begin the way he usually did. There was no greeting, no soft lead into the conversation. His voice came through sharp and tight, already carrying the weight of anger. He asked me what I thought I was doing. The words came quickly after that, one over the other. He said I had blindsided him. He said I had turned something private into something public. He said that bringing an attorney into a family matter was unnecessary, that it made everything look worse than it was. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not try to correct him or defend myself in the moment. I let him speak until there was nothing left for him to say. What struck me most was not the anger itself, but what was missing from it. There was no acknowledgement of the money, no recognition of the pattern that had led us here, only the reaction to being confronted. At one point, his voice shifted, not softer, but more strained. He began to talk about pressure, about responsibilities, about things not always going according to plan. It was the closest he came to explaining, though even then, the explanation circled around the issue rather than landing on it. In the background, I could hear another voice, Vanessa. I could not make out every word, but I heard enough to understand the direction of it. The suggestion that I had given the money willingly, that there had been no obligation attached to it, that interpretation hung in the air between us. When Daniel finished, there was a brief silence. I realized he was waiting for me to respond. When I spoke, my voice was calm. I told him that I loved him. I told him that had never changed. Then I told him that love did not mean I would allow myself to be treated as though I did not matter. I spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. I reminded him of the graduation, of the tickets I had not been given, of the dinner that had been planned and then quietly removed. I told him I had driven by his house that night, that I had seen the lights, the people, the celebration. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long one. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, not completely, but enough that I could hear the shift. The certainty was gone. In its place was something less defined, something uncertain. He said my name, but he did not finish the thought that followed. I did not press him. I did not ask for an explanation or an apology in that moment. I had not called to argue, and I had no intention of turning the conversation into something that would spiral beyond control. Instead, I told him that everything I needed to say was already in the letter, that I was not trying to hurt him, that I was asking for clarity and respect. Then I ended the call. I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand, listening to the quiet that returned. I did not feel relief, but I did not feel small either. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. And I understood, with a clarity I could not ignore, that whatever came next, our relationship had already changed. The days after Daniel's call settled into a quiet rhythm, but it was not the kind of peace that comes with resolution. It was a waiting kind of quiet, stretched thin across each morning and evening. I moved through my routines as I always had, but everything felt slightly sharper, more defined, as though I was seeing my life without the softening layer I had once placed over it. Daniel did not call again right away. The silence between us lasted several days, long enough for the anger from our last conversation to cool, long enough for something else to take its place. I did not reach out. I understood that whatever came next needed to come from him. When the phone finally rang, it was late in the evening. His voice was different this time. The sharp edges were gone. What remained was something quieter, heavier, as if the weight of everything he had avoided had finally settled in. He told me he had been thinking. He said he had let things go further than he ever intended, that what had started as temporary had turned into something he no longer knew how to manage. He admitted that he had been embarrassed, that each time he failed to repay me, it became harder to face me honestly. Avoidance, he said, had seemed easier than explanation. He spoke about pressure, about trying to maintain a certain image, about expectations that had grown larger than he had anticipated. Vanessa's influence was there in his words, not as an excuse, but as something he could no longer ignore. He said he had allowed himself to be pulled in directions that did not sit right with him. I listened without interrupting. There was a part of me that had already understood most of what he was saying. Hearing it out loud did not shock me. It confirmed what I had come to see on my own. When he finished, there was a pause. Not an empty one, but one that felt like space opening up, waiting for something new to take shape. He said he was sorry, not quickly, not as a way to move past the conversation, but slowly, as though he meant to stay with the weight of it. I acknowledged what he said, but I did not rush to comfort him. Some things needed to settle before they could be softened. Later that same evening, Lily called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew she had learned something she had not known before. There was confusion in it, and hurt, and a kind of urgency that comes when trust has been shaken. She told me she had not known about the dinner. She believed I had chosen not to come, that I had my own reasons. No one had told her otherwise. I felt something in me shift at that. She apologized, even though there was nothing for her to apologize for. I could hear the sincerity in it, the way she was trying to make sense of something that did not fit with what she believed about her family. I told her gently that none of this was her fault, that her accomplishment stood on its own, untouched by anything that had happened around it. I reminded her how proud I was, how much that had never changed. By the end of the call, her voice had steadied. In the days that followed, Daniel and I began to speak in more practical terms. He proposed a repayment plan, structured and clear. For the first time, the situation was being addressed directly, without avoidance. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was honest, and for now, that was enough. If you're still watching and you're wondering how everything finally comes together, comment number 8 below to let me know you're ready for the ending. Now let's move into the final outcome of the story. In the weeks that followed, everything began to settle, though not in the way it once had. The sharp edges of conflict softened, but they did not disappear. What remained was something quieter, more deliberate, as if every interaction now carried a clearer sense of what it was and what it was not. Daniel kept his word. The first payment arrived on a Friday morning. I noticed it when I checked my account, the number sitting there plainly, without ceremony. I did not feel relief the way I might have expected. There was no sense of victory, no satisfaction. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement that something long avoided was finally being faced. It was not just about the money. It never had been. It was about the fact that for the first time, things were being handled honestly. Our conversations, when they happened, were different now, slower, more careful. The ease that once filled them had been replaced with something more measured. It was not comfortable, but it was real. Vanessa, on the other hand, had grown noticeably distant. I did not hear from her, and I did not reach out. From what I understood through Lily, the situation had shifted within their household as well. The version of events that had once been controlled and contained no longer held together the same way. Lily had begun to see things more clearly, and that clarity had changed how she looked at both of her parents. It was Lily who called me one afternoon and asked if we could have dinner, just the two of us. There was something in her voice that reminded me of the little girl who used to sit at my table, asking questions and waiting patiently for answers. I agreed without hesitation. We met at my house the following Saturday evening. I kept things simple, cooking the way I always had, not trying to impress, only to care. When she arrived, she hugged me a little longer than usual, and I felt, in that moment, a quiet reassurance that not everything had been lost. During dinner, we talked about her plans, her future, the possibilities that lay ahead of her. There was laughter, soft and genuine, the kind that does not need to prove anything. After we ate, I brought out the gift I had wrapped weeks before. The paper was still smooth, untouched by time, waiting for the moment it had been meant for. When she opened it, her expression shifted, not dramatically, but in a way that told me she understood the intention behind it. She thanked me, her voice steady, her eyes thoughtful. Sitting there across from her, I realized something I had not fully allowed myself to accept before. I no longer needed to belong everywhere. I only needed to be where I was truly seen. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. When I look back on everything that happened, it does not feel like a single moment that changed my life. It feels like a series of small choices, small silences, small allowances that slowly shaped something I did not recognize until it was too clear to ignore. It did not begin with betrayal. It began with trust. It began with love that I believed did not need limits. Each time Daniel asked for help, I gave it freely, without question, without condition. I told myself that this was what it meant to be a mother, to support, to understand, to give more than you take. But what I have come to understand now is that giving without boundaries is not the same as loving well. Money, I have learned, is never just money when it moves through a family. It carries meaning. It reflects trust. It reveals how people see one another, whether with respect or with assumption. When that trust is handled carelessly, the damage reaches far beyond numbers. For a long time, I confused silence with peace. I believed that by not questioning, by not asking for more, I was protecting the relationship I had with my son. What I was actually doing was allowing myself to disappear inside it. That is the part I understand now. Love does not ask you to become invisible. It does not require you to accept being overlooked or dismissed. It does not grow stronger through imbalance. If anything, it weakens when one person carries all the weight while the other looks away. My husband used to say that love, like anything worth keeping, needed structure. At the time, I thought that sounded too practical, almost unkind. I thought love should be effortless. Now I know better. Structure is what protects love from being taken for granted. These days, my life looks much the same from the outside. I still wake early. I still sit on the porch with my coffee. The house is the same, the street is the same, but I'm not. I have learned that I can love my son deeply and still expect to be treated with respect. I can remain present in his life without surrendering my place in my own. And if there is one thing I would want anyone to carry with them from my story, it is this: you can love someone completely and still refuse to lose yourself in the process. In the end, some truths arrive quietly, not to break us, but to reshape how we see ourselves and the people around us. What once felt like loss can become clarity, and what once felt like pain can become direction. There comes a moment when we understand that love, in its healthiest form, does not ask us to shrink, to stay silent, or to give endlessly without being seen. It asks for balance, for honesty, and for the courage to stand in our own worth. Boundaries are not walls. They are the foundation that allows respect and love to exist side by side. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that finally set us free. Thank you for being here and listening all the way through. If this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to follow and subscribe for more stories like this.